Stacking up the Sabres against the rest of the Atlantic Division. Today we begin with the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. We'll get to Sabres versus Panthers coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sneaky Joe DiBiase at Sneaky Joe Sports if you want to follow me on Twitter. And if you want to get on our Locked On Sabres text line, today we were talking about, I pointed out in the group chat that it's 50 days until the Buffalo Sabres season begins. We are 50 days away from Sabres and Devils over in Europe. So, a lot to get to. If you want to become a part of our Locked On Sabres text club, breaking news alerts, little conversation back and forth there, especially once the season gets rolling. You can sign up by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. A lot to get to on today's show. We're going to start going through the Atlantic Division, breaking it down team by team. How do the Sabres stack up going into 2024-25 versus their division rivals? We will begin at the top with the Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. How far off are the Sabres from the Panthers? How do the two teams compare? And what lessons are there to learn about what Florida's done for the way the Sabres are building things? Get to all that coming up on today's show. As we go team by team, too, we'll try to figure out if there's any trade to be had here between the two sides, although with Florida, you know, the one name that we haven't talked about in a while, but was mentioned a lot, was Sam Bennett. He's in the final year of his contract, but doesn't appear as though they're trading him yet, at least. We'll get to that, though, coming up on today's show. Otherwise, you know, we're in the middle of August here. Pretty not a very newsworthy time in the hockey calendar, although we did get some around the league news that makes you think, okay, maybe a few things can happen in the league to keep you hopeful. The Blues, look at the St. Louis Blues out here. Offer sheeting in the middle of the day, in the middle of August, when your Friedmans and your LeBruns of the world are on some beach somewhere. They're not even paying attention. And what you had was the Penguins actually alerting everybody that something was coming. Because in the morning this week, there's the Penguins with, hey, we made this trade with the Blues. We have sent them our second-round pick this year and a fifth-round pick for a second next year and a third. Why? And then, of course, everyone's reaction, my reaction right away at least, was, why are these two teams trading draft picks in the middle of the summer? Are they bored? What is happening? Why are they doing this? Because the draft is 11 months away? What's happening? And then it's quickly pointed out, well, wait a minute. The Blues are acquiring their own second-round pick back from Pittsburgh that was involved in the Kevin Hayes trade. So now, ding, 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 what do you get? What do you think of immediately? Oh, we're about to see an offer sheet. Because why else would the Blues in the middle of the summer, when nothing else is happening, want to acquire their own second-round pick? Only explanation was, oh, there's an offer sheet about to drop. So you waited 3 minutes maybe, and I was updating Twitter, and bam. And actually, in the meantime, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be Carolina. I thought it was going to be the Hurricanes because they've got Seth Jarvis that is right now eligible to be offer sheeted. Martin Necas, of course, as well. Like there were big names in Carolina that were in play here, but it wasn't Carolina. It was Edmonton. And the Blues made two offer sheets to two different players, both on 2-year deals, Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, the defenseman and the center, young players, Back-to-back years, they were first-round picks for the Edmonton Oilers. Very young players, have not yet really established themselves as full-time NHLers. And the Blues are like, oh, we'll give them the money. We'll give them the money. Go ahead. You can't afford it, Edmonton. Daring the Oilers to match and saying, you can't do it. And we know from experience here, why did the Oilers, in part, other than getting, Matthew Savoy in the deal, why did the Oilers trade Ryan McLeod to the Buffalo Sabres? Because they couldn't even afford to pay Ryan McLeod $3 million on his next contract. Like, they just can't afford it. They're so up against the cap, and they got to pay Draisaitl and McDavid in the next 2 years. So they can't afford this. And the Blues are betting that they can't by giving these two players decent-sized offer sheets that are in the second-round territory and then the third-round territory. $4.58 million for Broberg per year over 2 years, $2.29 million for Holloway. So over almost $7 million in total salary that the Oilers suddenly have to find. And I don't think they're going to find it. Maybe they figure it out for one of the two, but I doubt highly that you're going to get it for both. And man, what a steal by the Blues. They get if they get one of them, a first-round pick that has developed and not quite played a lot in the NHL, which is kind of the same situation with both guys. Get them just as they're about to arrive at the NHL for nothing, not without giving up a first-round pick. Love that move by the St. Louis Blues. Love that a GM was even willing to do it. Come on, Kevin Adams. Go get Carolina. Let's open up the floodgates on offer sheets. Go strike. While the league is distracted, go get Seth Jarvis from the Carolina Hurricanes. That would be an awesome idea. Now, there is a Sabre that's eligible to be offer sheeted right now. And I'll say this. It would not stun me. It would in a sense, because even though we saw 2 offer sheets this week, offer sheets are still very rare. So in that sense, yes, I'd be stunned if there was another offer sheet because we don't see almost any. But from a logical standpoint, it wouldn't stun me if Payton Krebs was an idea for someone to get to be offer sheeted right now from the Buffalo Sabres. Because why is he still unsigned? What's happening there? There's no arbitration for Payton Krebs. I saw Chad DiDomenicis talking about this morning on Twitter. Are the Sabres staring at Krebs saying, you're going to take the qualifying offer. We're not giving you any more than the qualifying offer because you're just going to take it. And I don't know, maybe Krebs right now is flirting with the idea with other teams about an offer sheet. Now, I don't think he should get more than a couple of $1 million a year. But could another team get to, hey, we could get to the third round level of compensation where we'd give the Sabres a third round pick back for this former first round pick that kind of has lost his way a little bit. And maybe we could see if he turns into something. If I were another team, I would be looking to get Payton Krebs. So we'll see. I don't know what's going on between the Sabres and Krebs. I think a smaller level contract just kind of makes sense for both sides, but the Sabres, I guess, are hoping he just takes the qualifying offer, and maybe Krebs is holding out saying, I'm not doing that. And the two sides in a very, 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 very minor holdout or staring contest right now are staring at each other and saying, yeah, who's going to blink first? So I guess we'll see. We'll track the Payton Krebs situation as the summer goes on. I'm not worried about it at this point in time. I'm not worried about someone offer sheeting him because that's why I was so stunned. Everyone was so like, oh my gosh, look at offer sheets for 2 players that a casual hockey fan hardly even knows about because, boom, we just got offer sheets at all, and it's really cool. All right, so Krebs, we'll keep an eye on that. I think $1 million, maybe the two sides give him $100,000, $200,000 pay raise over what his qualifying offer is. Just end up there, land there. When we come back, let's start going through the Atlantic Division. We'll start at the top. How big is the gap between the Sabres and the Panthers? How much did the Panthers lose this offseason after winning the Stanley Cup? Get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by Gametime. I was actually, just before getting going on the show, I was looking at Gametime because me and some buddies are going down to the New York area to go see Bills and Jets in October. And we're already looking. And where am I looking? I'm looking on the Gametime app because I get all the views from exactly what I'm going to be looking at. I'm not familiar with MetLife Stadium. And it's just especially great feature when you've not been to a stadium before is, okay, like I'm looking through the MetLife tickets and, okay, section 123. Like in the Bills Stadium, I would know exactly where that is off the top of my head and know where in the stadium it is. But at MetLife, I'm like, where's 123? And then you look in, oh, it's in the corner. And you're at the higher end of it, and this is what the view looks like. That's one of the features, the many features that you get on the Gametime app, is you get to look at exactly what you're going to see when you arrive at the game. It's not just the views from your seats, though. It's killer last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You got flash deals, saving more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. There's zone deals, save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats, and the lowest price guarantee. If you find a ticket for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On Bills with our buddy Joe Marino, because the Bills are getting rolling preseason. You got these joint practices with the Steelers, and we are just a couple of weeks away from the beginning of the NFL season. Locked On NHL as well. If you want to check out for all your hockey content this summer, the offseason, getting you ready for the NHL season, which again is only 50 days away. Check out Locked On NHL. Both shows available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's dive in on the number one team that won the Stanley Cup, kingpins of the Atlantic Division, no doubt about it. Also, the betting favorite to win the Atlantic Division again this year at plus 240 over at FanDuel Sportsbook, the Florida Panthers. Fully expecting Florida to be a damn great team again. How big is the gap, though, between the Panthers, the top of the division, and where the Sabres sit? How much did the Panthers lose this offseason? And what, if anything, do the Sabres have an advantage on Florida in? Where can we see them catching Florida? I do have a couple of ideas for that aren't that crazy sounding. But let's start with the Panthers offseason. The Panthers were up against the cap, and part of the reason that I thought and many thought that Sam Bennett was a good trade idea for the Sabres this offseason was, hey, Florida's got guys to pay. Especially after winning the Cup, the star players are going to want their money. And to make room, Sam Bennett's $4.4 million, and you got 1 year left on that contract. You're not going to be able to keep him. But for now, they are keeping him. And at the moment, it kind of looks like on paper he's going to be their number 2 center. But Anton Lundell might have something to say about that along the way. But let's get to additions and subtractions for the Florida Panthers this summer. Additions. Nothing to ride that much home about. Jesper Boquist, AJ Greer, Thomas Nosek, Adam Boquist, Nate Schmidt. All right, so you got a couple of puck-moving defensemen, Boquist and Schmidt. Boquist kind of losing his way a little bit. Schmidt is a little bit of an older player at this point after, playing great in Vegas a few years ago. Not the player that he was there. Forward-wise, just a couple of bottom six guys that don't really get you all that excited. It's more about the departures for Florida and what they are losing. They are getting some replacement-level players back for some veterans that had their roles on that Panthers team that won the Stanley Cup and built up to that. They lose Vladimir Tarasenko, who was scoring some important goals for the Florida Panthers in the playoffs. He didn't have the best playoffs consistently, but every important game they had in the postseason when they needed a big goal, there was Tarasenko ready to provide it off that third line with Don Lundell and Luke Serenen. Tarasenko, 14 points in 19 games in the regular season for Florida last year. And then once they got to the playoffs, there was the decline. He only scored 5 goals in 9 games. But again, those 5 goals all came in important times. So Tarasenko, a little bit of a loss for them, veteran presence. this is really the trend. They lost veterans that you kind of know what to count on from them, and they're replacing them with guys where you kind of have, would you expect Thomas Nosek to score big, important goals in the playoffs like Tarasenko did? No. Oliver Ekman-Larsson out the door. Number 2 power play unit, veteran, puck-moving defenseman. I absolutely guarantee they're planning on or hoping Nate Schmidt is going to give them what Ekman-Larsson was giving them last year. Ekman-Larsson, 32 points on the season. Last year, he was playing a third pair role, 16 minutes a night, just about in the postseason. So modest loss. Same with Tarasenko. Ryan Lomberg, that's an energy guy. That's a character guy. That's a bottom 6 guy that has meant a lot to Florida. Was definitely a part of a healthy scratch rotation, though, with Kyle Okposo and others at the end of the season. The big loss for me, even though last year was a regression year for him, the big loss for Florida is Brandon Montour, who heads to the Seattle Kraken on a big contract, 7/7. Last year, we saw a 40-point decline for Montour. He went from 73 points in 22-23 to 33 points last year. Still playing, though, a big role in their top 4 over 23 minutes a night. And Montour, yes, he meant more for them 2 years ago than he did last year. But even last year, he was still giving them good top 4 minutes. And the year before that, we're talking about a number 1 defenseman for a year. So was he going to return to that form? Probably not. But is it in there? I mean, he just proved 2 years ago that it is in there. And who are they going to replace Brandon Montour with? Because as I look at their defense core right now, Aaron Ekblad and Gustav Forsling, and then I think you're right at Dmitry Kulikov and Nico Mikkola. And that, to me, is going to look like a weakness, is the defensive depth for Florida that is going to really be impacted by losing a Brandon Montour. So that's probably their biggest loss. The best thing they did, I think, this offseason was find a way to retain former Buffalo Sabres Sam Reinhart. Reinhart, who scored the game-winning goal to win the Stanley Cup, has developed into a consistent, reliable, all-around defensive forward that should be mentioned sometimes in the Selke conversation. I don't even have to say should be. He was. He finished 4th in the Selke voting last year for Florida. He scored 57 goals. We know a lot of that was power play reliant. He's definitely going to regress. He's not going to score 57 goals again, but 3 straight years in Florida, all over 30 goals. That he never did that in Buffalo. He never scored 30 goals for the Sabres. He's never not scored 30 for Florida. So you know what the floor looks like right now for Reinhart. The floor is he's going to score 30 goals. The ceiling now, we didn't know this ceiling was there. The ceiling of 57 goals and leading the league in power play goals, now that exists too. So what's most likely? He's probably going to fall somewhere in between. He's probably going to score between 35 and 40 goals. That's my guess. But with that type of goal scoring, combined with, you have to give it to him, he's turned into one of the best defensive forwards in the league. Those two things combined, this is a great hockey player. And Florida would have been kicking themselves, I think, if they let this guy go. And they found a way to retain him. 4-year deal, $8.625 million per year. Sorry, not a 4-year deal. See, this is where I got to get used to looking at Puckpedia as opposed to the long lost cap friendly now. Reinhart is not a 4-year deal. Reinhart is a long-term deal. He is under contract until 2032. 8-year deal with the Florida Panthers for Reinhart. So they did a great job finding a way to keep him. The salary was kept pretty low, I thought, too, at 8.6. It's I always fall into this trap with Florida. I know many do. That Florida, with the tax situation and the benefit of that, and also just winning the cup, Reinhart, I think, was worthy in free agency, open market. I bet Sam Reinhart could have easily got $10 million per year. Easily would have got $10 million per year. But he takes the hometown discount. Why? Why not? He lives on the beach, probably, in South Florida. Weather's great all year. Their team is amazing. They just won the cup. And then the taxes. You're going to have more money in your pockets at the end of the day than if you take $10 million from a team with super high taxes. So Reinhart gets the kind of the dream, I think, to stay in Florida, and the Panthers get the dream because they get the benefit of keeping the cap hit low. Works for both parties. When it comes to, quickly before we get to kind of comparing the Sabres to the Panthers, I mentioned Bennett's in the final year of his contract. He's not the only one. They're going to have some decisions to make. And Bennett could very well be someone that's out the door. They have 3 big contracts to give out after this season. They have to figure out Bennett. They have, if they want to, they have to figure out Carter Verhaeghe, who's become a great player for them. And they have to figure out Aaron Ekblad, who right now is a top pair defenseman with Gustav Forsling. So 3 critical players that they might not have room for or will have to try to find room for after this 1 year coming up. When we come back, how big a difference is there between the Sabres and the Panthers? And are the Sabres better at anything than Florida? I think they're better at one thing, at least one thing. And I do have a thought. If you're wondering about, hey, could the Sabres, I know this seems like a fairy tale land because they can't even get into the playoffs, but what are we trying to do here? The Sabres are trying to become a contender someday and win the Stanley Cup. What has to happen for Florida to fall back if the Sabres get really, really good? And there's a very obvious answer, I think, to that question. All that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride and every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Sneaky Joe DiBiase wrapping things up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Let's compare the Sabres and the Panthers. And what could happen to Florida that would see them drop back and hopefully the Sabres, be a team that could contend to take over the mantle as Boston ages and Tampa ages a little bit too. Let's start with the comparison. Top 6s. Who's better? Sabres or Panthers? The Sabres right now boast Thompson, Tuck, Peterka, Cousins, Quinn, and either Benson or Zucker. Florida, even with some of their departures, Barkov, Reinhart, Verhaeghe, and with Bennett, Rodriguez, and Tkachuk. Not a contest. It's Florida. Florida is more reliable. Barkov, is going to be an elite center. Thompson, you have your fingers crossed. He's going to return to being an elite center. Reinhart is a Selke candidate who scored 50 goals. Verhaeghe is a 30-goal scorer. Tkachuk does everything. Rodriguez has turned into a nice low-level top 6 forward. He's a better idea for the top 6 than Jason Zucker is. Florida, top to bottom, is better. Top to bottom. I wouldn't even begin to tell you where the Sabres have an advantage in their top 6. Where they should have an advantage is Dylan Cousins should be a better scorer for a second-line center than Sam Bennett is. I like Sam Bennett a lot. He shouldn't be a 30-goal guy, though, and he never will be. He never has been. Cousins did it, and then it was so bad last year. So I don't know what to do with Cousins. Cousins should be a better second-line center than Sam Bennett, but last year he certainly wasn't. So I can't say the Sabres have an advantage anywhere there. Bottom 6, I like Florida too, because even though they got some new, younger pieces like Mackenzie Antwistle is going to be on the 4th line for them. Mackie Samskovich, that's a player I'm not even that familiar with. Like, they got some guys that have come in here, Jesper Boquist, that are new, and we'll see what we get. But the reason I like their bottom 6 is I trust it to score more. Florida is always going to be physical enough. What about the secondary scoring? The Sabres with McLeod and Benson are going to give you a little bit. And I don't know if anybody else is giving you anything in terms of secondary scoring. Florida, I know Anton Lundell and Eetu Lutsarainen have high ceilings. Like they've flashed a little bit. They're young guys. They've been a little bit buried in the depth chart because the team's been so good. And that's a benefit, them being third liners. Lundell coming back, by the way, in a $5 million per year deal with Florida this offseason. So it's not bottom 6, in my opinion. Top pair defenseman, I would give to Florida easily. Forsling's a great defenseman, so is Ekblad. maybe not easily. Dahlin's a Norris caliber defenseman, but I know Florida's got 2 great defensemen. I think I've got 2 for the Sabres. I know I have 1. It's tough to tell right now, though, because we don't know what Byram gives them or Power or any of those guys. Samuelson, same thing. Forsling and Ekblad are rock solid. I would give the Sabres the advantage in defensive depth. That is where I would give them the advantage, because outside the top 2, let's give Byram right now number 2 status, just for sake of conversation. Then it becomes Kulikov, Mikola, Schmidt, Boquist versus Power, Samuelson, who am I missing? Henry Okiharu and Connor Clifton and Jacob Bryson and Dennis Gilbert. I like the Sabres' defensive depth a lot better than I do Florida's. Mine's pairings 2 and 3. I like more. And then goaltending. Can I say push? I'll say push. Because yes, Bobrovsky's had an amazing career and he's probably now going to the Hall of Fame. But Luukkonen was just a great number 1 goaltender. And I think Devin Levi, from listening to the show enough, if you do, I think Devin Levi's got star potential. So those 2, I like a lot. I like more than Florida's goaltending with Bobrovsky. And then Spencer Knight, I don't know if I could count on him yet. He's penciled in right now, I think, to come back as the number 2. But big question mark there. I like Levi more than I like Spencer Knight right now. I just have no idea how good Spencer Knight's going to be when he gets back on the ice. So I'll give the Sabres a slight advantage in goal. I'll give them a big advantage in defensive depth, and everything else is advantage Florida, if you ask me. What do the odds say about these 2 teams? The odds, the Panthers are plus 240 to win the division, which is just better than Toronto. The Sabres are 7th in the odds at plus 1,500. The point totals is a better representation, though, of how big the gap is. At FanDuel, over-under point totals, Florida sits at 102.5. That is 14 points better than the Sabres, who are at 88.5. And I think that's appropriate. I think 102.5 to 88.5, a 14-point difference going into the year in perception and like what you would think is most likely. I think that's fair, completely fair that there would be a 14-point gap between the 2. So that's the difference right now. Florida is a much better, more complete hockey team, a more reliable hockey team. You have a more reliable coach even right now in Paul Maurice, because that team can play his system. They could play Maurice's system. I am hoping that the Sabres team could play Lindy's system. If they can, then give me the wash on the coaches. But I have proof of concept in Florida. I don't have proof of concept with Buffalo when it comes to the coaching staffs and the styles that they want to play. The trade idea, the only one to me is Sam Bennett. Can Florida get pushed off their peak a little bit and say, okay, maybe we should trade this guy? It might be tough. I think you might have to do that before the season. You might have to give them something in return that is really good to get off of Bennett on a 1-year deal. I think the ship has probably sailed on that, though. And the Sabres' need for that is definitely diminished as well because of the Ryan McLeod trade. So ship's probably sailed on the Sam Bennett trade, which was an idea that we really liked for a long time. But I just don't see how it happens at this point. I could see him being traded or leaving for nothing after the season. All right, it's going to do it for us. Next up, we'll talk Maple Leafs. I'm going to try to get Mike DiStefano on the show from Locked On Leafs. They named Austin Matthews their new captain, or there's a transition going on, Tavares to Matthews for the captaincy. So we'll talk about the Leafs, which is always fun. Always fun to talk about the Leafs. We'll do a little of that coming up on our next show. Get some prospect talking along the way as well this summer. Thanks for listening. Locked On Sabres. Again, if you want to check out our text line, be sure to go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres, where you can find us there. Twitter at Sneaky Joe Sports or at Locked On Sabres. 50 days until the start of the Buffalo Sabres season, and we'll keep you up to speed. We'll go through it all coming up in the next coming weeks and months here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.